Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to install and enable a service, an add-on service in any OADA installation. The idea behind services is that interacting with any OADA or Trellis cloud almost inevitably involves running a microservice of some kind to watch for changes and then do things in response to it. And while you can run those anywhere on any machine, sometimes you'd like to run them just concurrent with all of the other containers that you have and use the OADA command itself to go ahead and bring it up and down with everything else. And another reason to install something is when you need to override some of the default behavior within OADA itself. And so if you'll notice, when you look at the top level directory, you'll see there are two different services folders. There's a services available and a services enabled. And so the way this works is whenever we're going to make a folder in services available to represent the service we want, and then we're going to symlink it from services enabled. And once we enable it at services enabled, now the OADA command will be able to pick it up and we'll be able to bring it up and down and so on, just like everything else. So let's go into services available. Now, one of the easiest things to do is to install an existing service. So we're going to pull out one from GitHub over here. So we'll pop him inside and you'll see there's one we have called Trellis Masker, that if you run this service, it will actually watch a particular endpoint as its job queue within OADA. And anytime a document shows up in it, a virtual document, it'll create a masked version of it. And that's what it does. So if we want to enable that or run that in our own cloud, we just need to clone it into this folder. So I'm going to copy the clone URL. Now you'll see there's a folder here named Trellis Masker inside of Services Available. So if we go in there, you'll see a bunch of things in here. Now this is the type of service where it's a single self-contained service. It doesn't have multiple things that it needs to run. So everything tends to just kind of live at the top level. So just to go over a few of the files that are here. First, there's a Docker file because the service itself will be a container. It's a really simple Docker file. It just uses Node version 13, copies the entry point script into the container, sets the work dir, and tells it to run the entry point script as its command. Nothing special. Then the other important file, the other second most important file, is this Docker compose file right here. The OADA command will take that and it will stick it on the command line after all of the other compose files that it finds. And so inside of here, some common things to do within one of these modules is add yourself to the yarn container so that when someone runs the yarn container, it'll go ahead and install all the node modules in this service as well. And also add yourself to the admin container so that when you're in there, you can get into this folder as the admin container and do things with it. And then typically we will actually define this particular service itself. And so we'll just tell it what do we need to do to bring up one of these containers. An important thing to note, though, is all of the paths inside of here are actually not relative to where this file lives. They're relative to the root of your OADA installation. That's just a quirk of Docker Compose that we can't get around. And so you'll also notice there's a couple environment variables that you can pass. You can override debug, you can override domain and token by default. And so when you're in a production scenario, that becomes kind of handy because you can layer in another module that would override the ones in this one. So that's the basics of it, and this particular one is a TypeScript, and so it's got a base index.mjs file that's going to run when it starts up. And so if we want to actually bring this thing up, we need to go up to Services Enabled and symlink it there. So the syntax is ln-s and the target is Services Available. Remember, just like domains, you need to make sure this is a relative path because the absolute paths of these things within the containers is different than the absolute path on the host machine. And so services available, Trellis Masker. And now that it's linked in services enabled, we should be able to bring it up. So we can do OADA up-D. And there it created Trellis Masker and it's up. So if we want to see it running, we can do OADA logs -f Trellis Masker. And you'll see it actually coming up, and it's actually doing its own yarn install because it didn't have a node modules in there to begin with. So that'll go ahead and come up and continue, and now we have the Trellis Masker module enabled. So that's one of the ways to install a predefined module. Now, what if we want to create our own module? Well, you saw there was a lot of files in there that are kind of boilerplate. If you want to use the same sort of boilerplate for your own modules, you can just look in the README file here, and you'll see that there's a command you can run that will actually create a template service for you. So npx and we're going to put a description here. This just goes into the README. It'll take it a couple seconds. So now you'll see there's a folder named My Service, and we go in there and we'll find the same Docker file, Docker Compose, all those other kinds of things, and you can start writing your code from there. It's got a config for you that you can use to configure things and pass domain variables in, or environment variables in, things like that. So that's how you would create a new service. Then there's a third kind of service, or a third thing that we can do with services, and that is if we want to install a group of services that all cooperate and share code and files together. So this Winfield folder here is an example of that. Inside of the Winfield folder, I actually have a set of services that all share code and cooperate. I have auth, from OADA script, a mirror service, and a translator service, and a startup service, and they all have a shared code folder. And so to do that, I have a single Docker Compose file, but it's actually gonna create a bunch of different containers. And the names of the containers by default will be the name of the upper level container, in this case Winfield, dash whatever name is here. So Winfield dash auth, Winfield dash ds from OADA, Winfield dash ds mirror, Winfield dash startup, and so on. And so the key difference here, if you go into the actual auth folder, you'll see there's a Docker file and all the same kinds of files we had in all the other things. It just defines a container. That's basically the same thing. The only difference is we move the Docker Compose up to the top level of this folder, and it's going to look a little bit different now inside of that. So in this particular one, we do some overrides on a few of the core services internally, like proxy or yarn, and then you'll notice that we can map things from Winfield auth nginx.conf, for example, into an added nginx.conf within the proxy container. That's what this one does. So we modify the proxy container, we modify yarn, we modify the core auth container in this example, the permissions handler, we add some scopes there, we add all the different folders that we have here to the admin container so we can see them, and then all the actual containers that this service will create. And so that's what these are right here. So Winfield-auth will create the Winfield/auth container. And all we need to do to actually enable all these things is just symlink the Winfield folder itself and not all of the individual ones. So if we go to services enabled and we link services available Winfield here, so now you'll see we have a Winfield symlink in here, and now actually our bash completion includes Winfield. And so if we did OADA up-d Winfield, you see it'll auto-complete to auth or from OADA mirror. Those are all the different containers that are available now that we've symlinked just that one Winfield folder in. But in that way, all of those containers can share all the same configs and can share code among themselves, and know that they're sort of all co-located within the same service. So that is how you install and enable services in OADA.